The Curses and the Covenants, A History Weaver Mystery, Book 2, by Connie Worden. Read by the author. Chapter 32. October 8, 1898. I've felt well enough the past month to do more than I had been doing, barely keeping myself clean and fed, and the house somewhat tidy, and the chickens and pig cared for. I have been well enough the past month or so to get out to the garden, overtaken with weeds as it was, to get it back somewhat in order, and salvage what harvest I could from it. I've just brought the last of the potatoes and carrots and gourds down into the root cellar, and now feel I can breathe a sigh of relief. The chickens I've been managing to butcher myself as need be, but I am not equal to doing the same with the pig. I will sell him for whatever I can get for him. I'm grateful Ole and I never did get around to acquiring any cattle as we intended. The pig and the chickens, except the ones that fell prey to the hawks and other predators, managed to keep themselves alive in the worst of my illness by foraging. I suppose cattle could have done the same, but I'm very glad there are none to add to my list of cares and concerns to be dealt with. I do not plan to return to England until after the baby's birth. Winter would be no time to travel, and by my reckoning, baby is expected around the middle or end of March. Still winter in these lands. I hope I may avail of Dr. Lamb's kind offer to stay in his home as a sort of lady's companion to his widowed mother who lives with them, he being a bachelor as yet. He came around again near the end of September as he was passing through our little settlement of Beaver Row, or so I hear people begin to call it regularly, to check in on me and learn if I was still willing to come to Penhurst when matters can be so arranged that I am free to leave my home here. He plans to return by the end of this month of October, hopefully before the snow flies, to see if I am then ready to leave our homestead. There is much to attend to on it before then, but I have accomplished much today and can spare a little time for leisure. With all the busyness of the things that needed attended to that had fallen by the way during my illness, I have had very little time to pursue the line of thinking that I had been pondering during my convalescence, and no time for writing in my diary until now. But there were some observations about Genesis 3 that interested me, which I did not find time nor strength to record before life returned to its normal occupation. With the garden in now, and no one but myself to care for in the evening, perhaps I can take some minutes, or hours, to sit and write by lamplight. My sleep has been troubled by long wakeful periods in the night. I will sit and write until I can no longer keep my eyes open, and hope that retiring to bed later tonight can keep the wakefulness of the wee hours at bay. Now, if I can cast my mind back to remember the thoughts I've had that I've had no chance to write. Still on the subject of the curses of Genesis 3, I found myself looking for words beginning with S to encapsulate what each curse, or perhaps decree or pronouncement would be more accurate language, would mean for the rest of our time on this poor planet. That the curses accurately describe our state of existence on this globe, anyone should be able to see. 2 pronouncements to the serpent, 2 to the woman, and 2 to the man. Though it was upon the earth that this curse was pronounced, it was man who would bear the brunt of it. To the serpent, he would crawl in his belly and eat dust. Then there would be enmity between the serpent and the woman and her seed, and the serpent would bruise the heel of the seed of the woman. But the serpent's head would be bruised. To the woman, in sorrow she would bring forth children. Then her desire would be to her husband, but he would rule over her. To the man, the ground would bring forth thorns and thistles, and the bread that would come from it would also only come by the sweat of the man's brow. Then, in the end, the man would return to the dust from whence he was formed. The words spoken to the man are perhaps the easiest to understand, and the latter half easier than the first. So I think I will work backwards, and examine the curses spoken to the man first, and then the woman next, and then the serpent last of all. The most obvious of all the decrees is the one given last to Adam, death. There is no evading it. Perhaps it sums up or contains all the rest. All that is wrong with our condition, all that is amiss with our planet, that is not directly sin in itself, can really be traced back to the fact that all must die, even and including the earth itself. That is the meaning of the thorns and thistles that would grow so readily upon it from that time to this. They are simply indications of the death that everyone, even the earth itself, will someday taste. Because I was looking for words beginning with S to capture the meaning of each curse, I've chosen separation to go along with the curse of death. There is the sting. That is what makes death so terrible. The separation of our loved ones from us in death. But it is also a good descriptor of what death is. The soul and spirit are separated from the body, and the body without the spirit is dead, as James 2:26 informs us. But the first decree to the man, because of the thorns and thistles the earth would produce, as a sign and signal of its eventual death, was the decree of struggle. Life would require labour, hard work. What an accurate depiction of life on our planet. It is struggle that ends in separation or death. And though that struggle falls on the shoulders of both men and women, it is incumbent on the man to do the lion's share of the hard labour, being the larger and stronger of the species. As with all that I've seen so far, I now know to look for the mercy in the curse. In fact, the cure for the curse lies in the curse itself. As death frees us fully and finally from the curse, so the struggle to survive grows not only the food we need to eat, but the character we need to enjoy it and be grateful for it. I see how work, even hard work, is rewarding for its own sake by the good traits it instills in us. After mankind became sinners, we needed that struggle to shape and mould us and chisel away at the faults that so easily beset us. In fact, because of sin, struggle is necessary to build our characters. The ultimate struggle of our lives is against sin, and we must learn not to chafe against that struggle but to enter into it willingly. As the first test God gave to man was in regards to their food source, their life source, food being a source of life, and as man's first wrong choice was in this matter of their life source, the choice of independence from God over dependence on God as their life source, so man must learn the cost of choosing attempted independence from God. That cost was struggle, specifically in regards to their food source. How fitting was this decree of God on the earth, that man must now work by the sweat of his brow. We are helplessly unable to meet all our own needs within our own selves. That was the reminder of the two trees. We are utterly incapable of being our own life source, just as we are incapable of being our own food source. But the futile attempt to be our own gods and provide all our own needs must be exemplified by the struggle that would be required in man's attempt to meet his own needs and provide his own sustenance outside of God's providence. Every time he would pull a thistle or sink a tool into the hard earth, he would be reminded that he once thought he could be his own source. He would be reminded of his erstwhile choice of self as source over God as source. And that bitter reminder would keep him, or them rather, in a state of remorse of that first wrong choice. That state of remorse, at least of repentance rather, is another of those hard blessings. A hard but blessed state. Now to the curses spoken over the woman. If the curse spoken to the man was about the end of life, the curse spoken to the woman was about its beginning. From one end of life to the other, life would be filled with sorrow. It would begin in suffering. It would end in separation. And so the merciful curse of suffering, which was the taste we must know if we were all to partake of the tree of the knowledge of good and of evil, was the first curse, if it was a curse, issued to the woman. The bearing of children would involve much more suffering than simply their birthing. The far greater suffering for me was in the loss of my little child. but that too is part of the pain of childbirth. If my child had lived and grown, there would come a time when his actions would have contrived to break my heart also. A mother's heartstrings are so entwined with a child's, there is no untangling them. This too is part of the pain of bearing children. But this is a unique way a woman bears the image of God that a man cannot know. Was it not God himself who willingly took on the pain of bearing offspring, the pain of suffering, and even death on a cross for us to be born again as his children? If we must be born again to see the kingdom of God, as Jesus told Nicodemus in John 3, the suffering was God's, the one bringing about the new life. It strikes me that the majority of distinctly feminine hardship in a woman's life, the pieces about which she may most rightfully claim, "It is harder to be a woman than a man," are the pieces of her life that relate to her ability to bear children, or the fact of bearing and raising children. The majority of the distinctly masculine hardship in a man's life, the pieces about which he may most rightfully claim, "It is harder to be a man than a woman," are the pieces of his life that relate to his struggle to work and provide for himself or a family. How interesting that this is exactly the picture we're given of human existence thereafter in Genesis 3. Then in the second half of the decree spoken to the woman, I see the curse, strife. I noticed a peculiar turn of phrase in Genesis 3:16. "Thy desire shall be to thy husband, and he shall rule over thee," echoed very nearly in Genesis 4:7, before Cain killed Abel. God speaks to Cain about sin as though it is a living being, and tells him, "Unto thee shall be his desire, and thou shalt rule over him," with him meaning sin. I understand God's words to the woman a little differently in light of God's words to Cain. The desire of sin for Cain was not the desire of love, it was the desire of mastery. Sin, or really Satan, that serpent of old, desired to master Cain, but Cain should strive to subdue the temptation and gain the mastery over Satan in that way. Then I saw that the desire of God's words to the woman in Genesis 3 was more about mastery than about love. Strife is no curse instituted by God, simply the natural outcome of the choosing of the self-first life. There is a struggle for mastery over the other, between man and woman, between husband and wife, between human being and human being. If there was any part of this pronouncement that was God's doing, I believe it was only in giving man the edge in the struggle for mastery. Man would be bigger and stronger, and not easily subdued by woman. She had led her husband once into sin. Her partially self-induced and partially God-induced punishment would be that she would desire mastery over her husband and strive for it, and be unable to achieve that desire. But again, the cure is in the curse. It is in the free and willing submission and letting go of the self-first life, willingly putting another first, ceasing striving. In the pronouncement that woman would be unable to subdue her husband, there lies another of God's hard blessings to her. In her inevitable knowledge of his greater strength, she must cease her futile striving against her husband, as she must come to cease her futile striving against her Maker. Again, in this curse, but such a merciful one, lies the latent image of God given to women in a unique opportunity not afforded to the man. God is incapable of the self-first life. The woman, through her weakness, must necessarily learn to be incapable of it. Of course, the image of God is afforded to man in a way not afforded to woman, in the conjoining between man and wife, according to Ephesians 5:25. Both have the opportunity to give up their lives, their self-first ways, their striving, their craving for domination, for their counterpart in a marriage, but in different ways. Instead, the man, as the protector and provider, has the opportunity to lay down his life for his bride, as Christ did the church. I could only wish my husband had laid down his life in some such noble cause, instead of the ignoble way his life ended. But I bear much responsibility in the direction his path took in the end. I feel a kinship to Eve. I bear much responsibility in leading my husband into sin. But finally to the serpent, that reptilian incarnation of Satan himself. 2 words come to mind to represent the pronouncements spoken over Satan: sin and sacrifice. And it seems they must go together for a beautiful, glorious S-word to be accomplished: salvation. Satan's sin was the original one, but his temptation was the same one with which he induced Eve, to choose her own way over God's way, to elevate herself into the position of Most High, to answer to no higher being than self. And Satan's attempt to raise himself above the Most High resulted in his being brought lower than the lowliest. He is truly now the lowest of the low, the evilest of the evil. What could be lower than that? That is where sin brings us. In our attempts to serve no one but ourselves, we become slaves indeed. Satan is also bound by his own nature that was entirely corrupted and incapable of any good. He is but a worm on his belly in the dust, though he is all too capable of bringing us down with him. But there is nothing good, nothing noble, nothing praiseworthy, nothing admirable left to find in his nature. Through sacrifice, his defeat was made sure. Though he could bruise the heel of the seed of the woman, it is his head that the seed of the woman bruised, a fatal bruising indeed. Through the sacrifice of the seed on humanity's behalf, Satan's plan to rule humanity through their corruption and bring us down into the dust with him was made null and void. What amazing truths are hidden within these curses of Genesis 3. I feel I could not plumb their depths in a lifetime. And I certainly can't plumb their depths in this one night, though I have stayed up well past my usual time, and am now suddenly feeling the weariness of the struggle of the day. That age-old struggle with the thorns and thistles of Genesis 3, creeping over me. I must extinguish my little light and crawl into bed and close my tired eyes, and hope for a better sleep than I've been having of late. I hope I shan't dream of snakes and trees and shame in a garden. My mind is still whirring, but I need it to settle down for sleep now. Good night, dear diary.